Go ahead and get this kicked off here. I'm going to share my screen so you all don't have to look at my face too closely this morning. And, I apologize. Normally we'd be sitting in the hotel with a nice breakfast in front of us. And I hope that in 2022 we can all get together again and talk and be in person. I think for this year, since we have this opportunity where our soil and water conservation districts can't be at a table with you all to have discussions, we'd like to take the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the work that we do as districts and maybe tell you a few things you don't know. I think that if you're maybe a new legislator or partner, this would be interesting, that you'll learn a lot. And even if you're somebody that's worked with soil and water conservation districts for a long time, my hope today is that you still take away something new. So our title today is, what are SWCDs, Indiana's local conservation partner? And I think in essence, we're going to talk about what is the true definition of a soil and water conservation district, but then we're going to talk about the things that make them unique and special and great in the work that they do. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today, just give you a brief outline. First, I hope you got your coffee. I've got mine here on standby. It's early. I hope the coffee and amenities at your location are good, and if not, I guess that's on you. If the coffee service isn't great this morning, I don't know what to tell you, but if you don't buy the groceries, I wouldn't complain. So we're going to go and have a brief history of the soil and water conservation districts and give you an idea of the beginning, not too much. And then we're going to talk about how they're basically organized. And then we're going to talk about the conservation partnerships that they operate within, but then also those partnerships that they engage on outside of the normal folks that they work with. And then I hope to tell you a few things that maybe you didn't know about districts that are, I think maybe even surprising facts for some of our districts themselves. And then I like to cover 3 districts today that we're honoring this year and talk about some of the neat, innovative work that they're doing. And then finally, we will end with some of our district priorities for the 2021 General Assembly. So get us kicked off, I thought I'd share, I have a video clip. This is from our National Association of Conservation Districts, and I think it helps give you just an idea of kind of the history of districts and how they fit in the national level. And we'll only watch just a couple minutes here, and then we'll resume the presentation.
Soil, water, and other natural resources. Conservation districts are the heart of what nourishes and sustains our country. Established beginning in the 1930s, conservation districts have overcome challenges and adapted to build a community committed to conservation of our nation's natural resources, to provide for an ever-growing population. Conservation districts were born out of the Great Depression, a result of our nation's tremendous loss of topsoil during the Dust Bowl period, and a critical part of Hugh Hammond Bennett's vision to rescue and restore our country's fertile farmlands. In 1935, Congress established the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Soil Conservation Service, now named the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. Hugh Hammond Bennett headed and built the agency and became widely regarded as the father of soil conservation in America, thanks to his emphasis on improving soil health. In 1937, President Roosevelt recommended the Standard State Soil Conservation Districts Act to every governor in the United States. This act gave states a step-by-step guide to create conservation districts and listed what powers and responsibilities the district should have, such as conducting demonstrations, carrying out research, directing prevention and control measures, giving assistance to landowners, and supporting wise land use. Arkansas became the first state to enact legislation regarding conservation districts, followed quickly by several other states. The first district in the nation, Brown Creek Soil Conservation District, was chartered in North Carolina on August 4, 1937. By July 1, 1945, all 48 states had passed district enabling acts. Conservation districts grew stronger during the 1940s, educating communities about the need for erosion control and practical measures to combat it.
I am concerned about these youngsters of ours that are coming on, whose heritage of rich soil is being destroyed by our prevailing farm methods. The economic threat is grave, but even more serious are the social implications of these wasteful practices on our future generations.
Well, I think that, helps give you an idea of where districts got their start. And I want to kind of segue from that national perspective into our state here in Indiana and the rich history that districts have. There is a soil and water conservation district in each of Indiana's 92 counties. Our district law was created back in March 11th, 1937, shortly after President Roosevelt's legislative act. And our first district was Vanderburgh County, established in 1940. Our last district was established in the early 1970s, but the majority of them date back to having their charters in the 1940s. Soil and water districts are a governmental subdivision of the state in a public body, corporate, and politic. And they were organized and came together to have one voice under our organization, the Indiana Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts, on January 12th in 1944. And then our organization formally became a nonprofit in 1968. The State Soil Conservation Board was also established under the State Department of Agriculture, and it is the policymaking body for soil and water conservation. They have a duty to assist supervisors in soil and water districts to carry out the powers and the programs that they're charged with. We have a couple pictures for you here these are actually pictures from Indiana. That's a tree planting on the top down in Evansville in the 40s, and then a field day down at the bottom, same time frame. So I want to talk a little bit about the basic organization of soil and water conservation districts, because I think it's what kind of lays the foundation for the work that we do. Each district is led by a board of supervisors consisting of 3 elected and 2 appointed board members. And this part, I think, is kind of essential, the definition of how and who can serve. And they must be an occupier of a tract of land that's located within the district and maintain permanent residence within that district. And they must be qualified by training and experience to perform the duties. And so I think it's important to remember that these soil and water conservation districts are led by landowners in the local community. And they are kind of that local tie to the work that we do that ties into that state and national level. Our boards also have non-voting associate supervisors that can help advise them. Our employees at districts are designated in code as county employees, unless they are designated otherwise in special circumstances. For example, Marion County is a county city, so they are exempt. And most of our districts are located in a USDA service center and work closely with our USDA partners, Natural Resources Conservation Service and Farm Service Agency. And our budgets are kind of made up of a mix of federal, state, and county funding. And a lot of our funding, especially for employees, comes from the county level. And as you can imagine, counties vary widely across the state and revenues. And so, I think the funding and our capacity as a district ranges across the state. And so while they're uniquely created the same, they're not necessarily funded the same. And I mentioned the districts have one voice in our association. We are that nonprofit that represents all 92 county soil and water conservation districts as our members. It's important to recognize we are governed by a 13-member board of voting members, 8 of which are regional directors, and then 5 executive board positions. We also have proxy vote ability for 8 assistant region directors that work within those regions as well. And I think it's important to recognize here that the association is made up of local soil and water conservation district board members themselves. So these folks serve on their local board as well as on the state board and bring that local knowledge to the state level so we can all kind of collaborate and work on the larger issues. We do have staff. We have myself, I'm the executive director, and we have a communications director. We also have 3 staff that work for the Conservation Cropping Systems Initiative, and a director and 2 program managers. And that's a program of the Conservation Partnership, and we'll mention that maybe here in a little bit. And then we just recently hired our first urban soil health program staff, our director, and that's a new program, and I'll maybe give you just a brief overview of that later. As the association, our mission is to enable the conservation of Indiana's natural resources. We strive to improve the environment and quality of life for future generations, and I think it's important to focus on that we enable, because it's our job to enable the conservation of our Hoosier natural resources, but we do that through the local soil and water districts, and that's our job, to support and help them. And districts are really the local cornerstone of a multi-layered partnership that is a conservation delivery mechanism from the federal level all the way down to that local level. We're part of the Indiana Conservation Partnership, and I will read verbatim the mission that's to provide technical, financial, and education assistance needed to implement economically and environmentally compatible land and water stewardship decisions, practices, and technologies. You know, I think it's important to recognize that we as a conservation partnership all work together on combining resources and knowledge, messaging, and that we are all working together to move conservation forward in Indiana. And so if you weren't aware of the Conservation Partnership, the ICP is comprised of 8 agencies and organizations, the Association of Soil and Water Districts and our 92 districts, the State Department of Environmental Management, as well as the Department of Natural Resources, our State Department of Agriculture's Division of Soil Conservation, Purdue University's Cooperative Extension Service, the State Soil Conservation Board, and then our USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture partners, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, and the Farm Services Agency, FSA. So the ICP works together to really implement conservation across the state. And I think a big way we do that is through the Farm Bill programs that come through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And then we also do that through various grant and conservation programs through the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Environmental Management. But the thing I think that's unique about us, and we are one of a kind in my mind across the nation in Indiana, that we track conservation implementation and we work together so closely that we can really report on the accomplishments that we're improving Hoosier water quality and sustaining our fertile soil. So in 2019, we reported over 26,000 conservation practices that were implemented, and along with those practices, those protect the water quality in Indiana. And so we have what would you call a load reduction, or a reduction of maybe a water pollutant to the waterways of Indiana. And we have over a million tons of sediment were saved from entering our waterways, and 2.2 million pounds of nitrogen and 1.1 million pounds of phosphorus were also kept from entering Indiana's waterways. And this is just reporting on 1 year in 2019. Another thing that our partnership does is that we complete agricultural tillage transects and cover crop surveys. So we have the ability to report on trends in conservation, especially in terms of tillage and cover crop adoption. And so we do these statistically based surveys to basically have an idea of not just the practices that are being implemented with conservation dollars through the partnership, but also those practices that are being adopted by farmers and landowners that are doing it on their own because they're seeing the benefit to them. And so, we reported nearly 1 million acres of cover crops in Indiana in 2019. And again, we are a leader in cover crop adoption across the nation. We also work on organizing and having consistent messaging across the partnership. So we do administer the Conservation Cropping Systems Initiative program through the ICP. And that's really to promote the adoption of practices and cropping systems that can lead to improved soil health and ultimately improve water quality. And I think one thing that maybe a lot of folks may not know or aren't aware of is that the Conservation Partnership also developed the Pathway to Water Quality exhibit that resides at the state fairgrounds. And if you've never been there, it's been there for, I think, 28 years as of this year. And the Conservation Partnership maintains that exhibit in the off times and uses it throughout the state fair to educate folks on the types of things that they can do to protect our natural resources. So I mentioned too that districts have lots of partnerships that are beyond the Indiana Conservation Partnership. We are all represented on the Indiana Agriculture Nutrient Alliance Board, or the IANA board, through the association, and that's a collaboration on reducing nutrients in our water through kind of our typical conservation partners, as well as our agricultural commodity groups, Farm Bureau, the Agribusiness Council. Districts are also represented on the steering committee of the Indiana Conservation Alliance, a group of conservation organizations that work to conserve and protect our natural land and look for additional conservation funding in Indiana. Our districts are represented on the Woodland Stewart Institute, where we work to provide, outside of maybe what we typically think of the row crop agriculture area, advice to forestry landowners, private landowners, on how to manage their forest land sustainably. We are also represented on the Indiana Family of Farmers, relaying to people where their food comes from and how it's made, and the sustainable practices that are implemented to make it. We do partner with the Nature Conservancy on many conservation projects across the state, most recently in the Lower Wabash Basin in Southwest Indiana, and then the Upper White River Basin here just northeast of Indianapolis. And we also partner with the Indiana Soybean Alliance and Corn Marketing Council in conjunction with the State Department of Agriculture on the Infield Advantage program, a program that allows producers to kind of look at their inputs and compare data and have an opportunity to discuss ways that they may manage their inputs a little bit differently for the betterment of water quality. So I've been talking about districts and some of our partnerships, but I like to take an opportunity to maybe tell you a few things you don't know about districts, and maybe you do, and if you do, that's impressive. I think it's important that you understand that districts are on the front line to protect water quality in Indiana. And I can say this from experience. I managed 2 of the state water quality programs previously at the Department of Environmental Management, the non-point source program and total maximum daily load program. And I can tell you that districts were, when I was there, one of our #1, if not the #1 partner, and still are today. So you may not realize that on behalf of IDEM, districts assist in administering stormwater erosion programs for construction runoff. 49 of our 92 districts actually review construction stormwater plans, and 35 of those 49 districts also do on-site inspection of erosion control measurements. You should recognize that districts also lead many of the watershed restoration planning and implementation efforts throughout the state and through the state non-point source program. Currently, 30 out of the 47 open planning and restoration efforts are led by districts. Districts also partner with IDEM to implement and coordinate the total maximum daily load program, working with them to provide outreach on the front end, and then after the development of a total maximum daily load plan, helping to implement practices that improve the water quality afterwards. Districts also lead many of the water quality improvement projects that are funded through the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Lake and River Enhancement program as well. And maybe you knew this, but districts are also partners on new and innovative approaches. I think this is something that we can pride ourselves on, that we try to be on the forefront of new resource issues and concerns along with our partners. Districts are currently partnering with the Indiana Invasives Initiative to develop what we call local cooperative invasive species management areas, or SWCDs, and these are used to help combat invasive species that take over and damage our native flora and fauna, and really can lay waste to our natural spaces. The association and districts are also partnering with the Nature Conservancy and other partners to pilot a crop insurance rebate program for producers implementing cover crops in the Upper White River. I think this is something that maybe with your counterparts in Illinois and Iowa you may have heard of, but the idea is to, in the adoption of cover crops and practices like them, that you have a more sustainable yield year over year, and that really reduces your risk as a producer. And so we would like to maybe reward some of those producers with just a little bit of a rebate on their crop insurance, recognizing that they may not be as much of a risk for insurance companies. So that's something that I think that they've kind of piloted in Iowa and Illinois, and we're starting to look maybe in a small scale here in Indiana what that might look like. And I think that this last one's kind of exciting for us as an association, but districts have implemented programs to address soil health and work with urban producers in our urban communities. We've had several districts that started this work. And now with the support of many districts across the state, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, states, and the State Soil Board, we as an association are working to create a statewide urban soil health program modeled after one of our own district programs. And we're just getting that started here in 2021. Now, I'd like to take an opportunity. I mentioned our districts that we recognize year over year. We have something that we call the District Showcase Award. And it's really meant from the Conservation Partnership to recognize those soil and water conservation districts that are really doing great and maybe creative and new work. And so I want to highlight our 3 districts that we're recognizing this year, because it just gives you kind of a microcosm of like the sheer spread of the work that districts do. So the first one here, I'm going to talk about Delaware County and removing dangerous dams. So Delaware County Soil and Water Conservation District spearheaded with partners an effort to remove 5 dams along the White River. And you may have heard this. I know that there was a bill in the past session to discuss the removal of dams. So, many dams in the nation and in Indiana are more than 100 years old. They are in disrepair. They're unsafe. I know that we hear again and again in Indiana about recreators that go over low-head dams and drown in the water, the boil that kind of holds them there. And so not only are they not safe, but they create poor habitat and impact the ecology of our natural waterways. So Delaware County Soil and Water Conservation District worked to bring several funding sources together, and they ultimately this past few years have removed 2 dams and created a modified riffle to make the third safer and better for the local ecology. And they're not stopping there. They have plans to remove the 4th dam in 2021, and will complete a feasibility study on the 5th to see how they may be able to remove it as well. I think this picture kind of helps give you a sense of these dams. And this is, along the White River, a main recreational river that eventually flows through Indianapolis, but this is here in northeast of Indianapolis in Muncie. And so you can see the 5 dams there. We have pictures. The top picture is the basically creating a safer area, creating a modified riffle to make the dam seem more natural. And then the picture below is one of those dams being removed this past year. So changing gears, I'd like to talk about Jennings County Soil and Water Conservation District and the work that they've done down in North Vernon to help create a community space, a green space that can be used by all the citizens down there. They've worked with the city to look at a former golf course and turn it into a more natural park space that can be used by everybody. They started off this partnership by creating a 6-acre pollinator plot to help with pollinator habitats, for those insects that pollinate our crops and are essential to our work. But they didn't stop there. They provided technical assistance on the expansion of existing pond that could be used for recreational opportunities for the local community. They also provided technical assistance with those Rule 5 erosion control reviews that I mentioned earlier, those stormwater reviews through IDEM. And they also helped with the installation of a culvert crossing. And to top it all off, they developed QR coding to attach to trees, so they would have educational opportunities for people as they walk through the park. They could scan those trees and learn about the species of trees they were seeing. Here's a couple pictures of the park. Look at that fantastic pollinator habitat and those tree plantings. We got a pollinator species down here. So great work and something that the local community can use for years upon years in the future. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about a collaborative partnership, not just of one district, but 3 districts working together to control invasive species. And I mentioned, the importance of that work that we're doing as districts. So Davies, Du Bois, and Martin collaborated to hire invasive species specialist that covered all 3 counties. The idea is to provide technical assistance and cost share to landowners. And this really supported 2 of those SWCDs that I mentioned just previously. They really conducted invasive species education and outreach program, and were able to provide coverage for landowners that, maybe not would have had technical assistance. I mentioned, that some counties are more fortunate than others to have local resources. So I think when you have a collaborative partnerships like this, that you have something that is brought to maybe a county that can't otherwise afford it. And we see this across all of the soil and water conservation districts in Indiana. Many work together on projects like these to collaborate and work across county boundaries and look more at the natural features than the political boundaries. They developed in this project kind of unique communication strategies to promote invasive species management and work one-on-one with the landowners to actually remove invasives. And so here's a picture here on the left side. This couple, they worked with them as landowners to remove invasive species on their woodland. The kind of a before and after picture. This is I have quite the unique and kind of fun campaign to let folks know about invasive species. And then here's just a little infographic on their accomplishments this year. 40 events, 650 hours of partners and volunteers, and impacting over 2,000 acres and 45 landowners. It's quite the accomplishment. And so I gave you those 3 examples because I think it's important when you invest in state money that kind of helps out with districts and our conservation partners, that you understand the kind of work that they can do and the type of investment you're making in Indiana. So our district priorities for the 2021 General Assembly are kind of summarized here below, and I'll talk about some of them a little bit more in detail. I think it's probably no surprise to you or anyone that this is a budget year, and that we do have an interest in the biennium budget and conservation funding levels through what is known as the Clean Water Indiana Fund, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail here in a second. And we're also interested in any kind of cigarette tax changes that might happen and how that may impact Clean Water Indiana positively or negatively. And again, we'll talk about that here in a moment on why that's important. We're also interested in a few other items, specifically programs for carbon footprint reduction. We are keeping an eye on House Bill 1055 that kind of works to help develop watershed commissions. And we want to continue to elevate that invasive species issue. We worked last session to get a summer study committee to look at the invasive species issue, because it's something that's widespread throughout the state and something that maybe could be addressed by you all. So I want to talk specifically about the budget impacts on Clean Water Indiana funding. And I'll give some basics. I know some of you may already know these details and some may not. So the Clean Water Indiana Fund is a conservation funding source that's administered by the State Soil Conservation Board and the State Department of Agriculture. And really, Clean Water Indiana has 2 locations, 2 pots of funding that are pulled from to kind of provide money for the fund. And that is a dedicated funding source and then a general fund appropriation. Our dedicated funding comes from 1/6 of the cigarette tax fund, which is 4.22% of all cigarette tax revenue. And then there's a general fund appropriation that had historically been at $1 million and was reduced in the last biennium of 2021 to $970,000. And with the, obviously downward trend in revenues and expecting the 15% reduction as requested by the governor, we're looking at that reduction, and most likely it'll be about $824,000 this year. And so you can see that kind of slow reduction in that general fund appropriation. So I think districts are really concerned about we have this thing with reducing dedicated funds. And so you may know this, that the cigarette tax revenues have declined over time. I know we have a bump right now during COVID, but over time they've historically declined 4 to 5% each year. With folks kind of focusing more on healthy initiatives and not as many people smoking. And we mentioned the cigarette tax implications on Clean Water Indiana if anything were to change. And so maybe an increase in cigarette taxes, which has been proposed in past sessions, might give us a momentary bump in funding. But as you know, the the emphasis behind increasing taxes on cigarettes is to curb behavior over time and convince more people to stop smoking. So over time, we're still going to see that decline as we've seen historically. And then I think we really have a concern about the chipping away of the general fund appropriation. We had just $30,000 chipped away, and then I know that it's a year unlike any other this year, and we're going to see all different kinds of impacts. And I know it's already impacted your session and will impact your session. But I think that we have concerns because that Clean Water Indiana funding really matches a lot of federal and local funding and creates kind of a really great return on investment. And so I'd like to talk just a moment about kind of that return on investment for those Clean Water Indiana funds and state funding. We work with our partners in the State Department of Agriculture, Division of Soil Conservation, to track a lot of our work. And we mentioned the conservation tracking for practices and load reductions to improve water quality, but we also track our funding. And so in 2019, I'd like to give you these funding levels, and this is conservation funding to implement practices. We had federal funding of $97 million come into Indiana. Our state funding level was only $3.2 million, and our local funding was $7.8 million. And so when you talk about return on investment for those state dollars that you all are appropriating and putting out there for conservation in Indiana, you look at the federal return for the money that we were able to bring in and match, it's $29, almost $30 of federal funding for every $1 of state funding that you provide. And even on the local level where, maybe they don't have the ability to provide as much funding, but we're still looking at almost a $2.50 local funding return for every dollar of state money provided. And this is just kind of our totals on statewide. And I think it's important that you recognize in some counties, depending on the workload and their ability to do more, some of your counties are looking at a return on investment of greater than $50 of federal funding per $1 of state funding. And we have this ability to fund unique projects. I mentioned our urban soil health program project through the state association. That project alone is bringing $300,000 in through the USDA NRCS annually. And we did seek $30,000 a year for the first 3 years of our project for Clean Water Indiana funding, that state level funding. But we're required to have a 25% match for that project. So we need $100,000. So the other $70,000 is being provided through the association, and we have districts across the state chipping in, little bits here and there to help kind of match that project. And so with this level of state funding, we have a project that is unique. It's going to create the ability for us to work with urban and small producers across the state, provide them with the technical assistance that they need, help maybe in some bigger communities with food deserts, just do great work in a new program. And, had we not been able to chip in and have our districts and our association kind of collaborate and bring that match in, maybe it wouldn't have come to fruition. So I think that you have this opportunity in state dollars to really kind of bring about great programming. And so, with the funding, I think that we'd really like to see that general fund appropriation kind of stay around $1 million. We don't want to lose funding. And I think that it's really important for you to recognize that, we have this great return on investment in Indiana on the conservation dollars that you do provide in our state budget. I mentioned the programs for carbon reduction. I think that, there's a bill that's going to be looking at funding that comes through the Clean Water Indiana Fund and the Benjamin Harrison Trust, specifically for carbon sequestration and carbon footprint reduction. And I think it's important to recognize that districts already provide local technical assistance on farming practices and forestry practices, especially in our southern districts. And we work with our conservation partnerships to implement them with private landowners. And districts and ICP partners are already tracking practice adoption and have experience, especially verifying agricultural practices. So we have a real interest in this, especially that, if you look at not only forestry and agricultural practices that sequester carbon, they have the the benefit of sequestering carbon, but they also have the benefit of improved water quality, which we've known for quite some time. So you get, kind of the more for your dollar there. So the watershed development commissions I mentioned earlier are our long history of working on water quality and really planning and implementing in river basins across the state. So, I think the districts are really on that front line of water quality and water improvement. And so we have a real interest in the development of future watershed commissions. I think it's also important to recognize that districts are already members on the existing river basin commissions in the state. They had a lot of representation on the Kankakee Basin and now still provide kind of input there. And then they are members of the St. Joe River Basin Commission, the Upper Wabash River Basin Commission, as well as work in partnership with the Maumee River Basin Commission. So I think it's important that, that we remember that districts are already working with those river basin commissions that exist. And so we have a real interest in this kind of work. And we really do bring kind of that historical and valuable land management knowledge to river basin management. So with that, I think I've thrown a lot at you, and I do want to say that I appreciate the work that as legislators you all do. And, I also want to thank our partners that partner with us on a regular basis here with our soil and water conservation districts, that we all couldn't do the work that we do without working together. I mentioned earlier that I recognize that this General Assembly will be different, and it's going to be a tough session and dealing with COVID. I think that we've historically been able to meet with you here in person and have breakfast, and then also bring our districts to the State House to talk with you. And so we'll work for maybe some of these new digital methods using virtual calls, and we're going to encourage our membership too to see if they can't talk to you one-on-one at home outside of the group settings. So with that, thanks for joining us. We appreciate the work that you do in representing us at the State House, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you.